to our lesson on factoring polynomials that have a greatest common factor, or GCF for short. Since we've already learned how to multiply polynomials with the distributive property, we're going to look at how to take a polynomial and break it into factors. In other words, we're starting with the product and finding the multiplication problem that gave us that product. To start looking at factoring, I want to first look at distributing. If we have the problem 4x squared times the quantity 5x plus 3, we need to distribute the 4x squared to both the 5x and the 3. Now we have 5x times 4x squared plus 3 times 4x squared. Multiplying these like we learned earlier, we get 20x cubed plus 12x squared. Since we saw the problem at the beginning, we already know that both the terms in 20x cubed plus 12x squared have a 4x squared as a factor. That means 4x squared is a common factor. But let's look at the two terms closer to see why. If I factor the coefficient from the first term, 20, into 2 times 10, I see that I could factor 10 again into 2 times 5. So 20 equals 2 times 2 times 5. If I look at the whole term, 20x cubed, I can expand the x cubed into x times x times x to write it as 2 times 2 times 5 times x times x times x. For the second term, 12x squared, I can factor 12 into 2 times 6. And I can see that I could factor 6 more into 2 times 3. So 12 equals 2 times 2 times 3. If I look at the whole term, 12x squared, I can now write it as 2 times 2 times 3 times x times x. Now that we have both terms factored completely, let's look at which factors they have in common. They each have a 2, another 2, an x, and another x. These are each common factors. But if we take all these and multiply them together, we get the greatest common factor, 4x squared, which is what we originally distributed. Identifying this is the key to factoring out a GCF. Another thing to notice is what was left of the terms after we took out the common factors. 5x and 3, which were the two terms in the original set of parentheses. 5x plus 3. Now that we've dissected the process of distributing and factoring, let's work through some examples where we don't know the original multiplication problem. First, let's factor 36x to the fourth plus 24x. 36 is the first coefficient, which we can factor into 4 times 9. The 4 factors again into 2 times 2, and the 9 factors again into 3 times 3. So 36 equals 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. If we expand the x to the fourth, we can write the term 36x to the fourth in its completely factored form. 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times x times x times x times x. 24 is the second coefficient, which we can factor into 4 times 6. The 4 factors again into 2 times 2, and the 6 factors into 2 times 3. So we can write 24 as 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. Now we can write the second term, 24x, in its factored form. 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times x. Since we have both terms completely factored, we can now identify the common factors to find the greatest common factor. Notice that both terms have a 2, another 2, a 3, and an x in common. If we multiply all these together, we get the GCF to be 12x. Now all we have to do is factor it out. First, we take the GCF and write it in front of a set of parentheses. Since our original polynomial had two terms, there have to be two terms inside those parentheses. The first term is formed by multiplying the leftover factors from the 36x to the fourth. Notice that after we take out all the factors that make the GCF, we have a 3 and 3 x's left over. Multiplying those back together, we get 3x cubed, so we'll put that in the parentheses. The only factor left from the 24x is the 2, so that will be the second term in our parentheses. Now we know our solution. 36x to the fourth plus 24x equals 12x times the quantity 3x cubed plus 2. Remember, you can always check your answer by distributing the 12x back in. 12x times 3x cubed equals 36x to the fourth, and 12x times 2 equals 24x. So we know our answer is correct. Finally, let's factor the trinomial 12x cubed minus 6x squared plus 3x. 12 is the first coefficient, which we can factor into 4 times 3. The 4 factors again into 2 times 2, so we can write 12 as 2 times 2 times 3. If we expand the x cubed, we can write 12x cubed in its completely factored form, 2 times 2 times 3 times x times x times x. Negative 6 is the second coefficient. But we don't need to worry about the negative at this point. We can factor 6 into 2 times 3, which is completely factored. Now we can write the second term, still ignoring the negative for now. 6x squared is factored as 2 times 3 times x. The last coefficient is 3, but 3 is prime, so it only factors into 1 in itself. So we can write the third term factored as 1 times 3 times x. Since we have all three terms completely factored, we can identify the common factors and find the greatest common factor. Make sure that any factors you identify are common to all three terms, not just two of them. If we look at all three sets of factors, we can see that they all have a 3 and an x in common. If we multiply these together, we get the GCF to be 3x. Now all we have to do is factor it out. First, we take the GCF 3x and write it in front of a set of parentheses. Since our original polynomial had 3 terms this time, there have to be 3 terms inside those parentheses. Notice that I put the negative for the second term in the parentheses. Doing this is what has allowed me to ignore it up to this point. The first term is formed by multiplying the leftover factors from the 12x cubed. Notice that after we take out the factors that make the GCF, we have a 2, another 2, an x, and another x. If we multiply these all back together, we get 4x squared, which we put in as the first term in our parentheses. There is a 2 and an x left from the 6x squared, so 2x will be the second term in our parentheses. 1 is the only factor left in our last term, so we'll put the 1 in the parentheses as the last term of the trinomial. Remember, this 1 is very important because we started out the problem with a trinomial. So there has to be a trinomial in the parentheses. Otherwise, if we distribute the 3x back into only two terms, we'll never get back to the three terms we started with. So now we know our solution. 12x cubed minus 6x squared plus 3x equals 3x times the quantity 4x squared minus 2x plus 1. Remember, you can always check your answer by distributing the 3x back in. Now that you've seen some examples of identifying a GCF and factoring it out, try some of the activities that go with this lesson to practice on your own.